I grew up in a family that told stories. I grew up at a table where dinner was secondary to the entertainment of our conversation. And if we weren't telling stories, we were reading stories. And I raised 2 children who know how to read stories, and they gave me grandchildren who know how to read stories. Stories are my life. My granddaughter Josie starts her stories one upon a time. One upon a time. My grandson Elroy says, "Tell me a story from your mouth," which means a story of our family. One of the greatest gifts my mother ever gave me was one winter she took all the family photo albums and she divided them up into boxes. She gave my brother a box of pictures. She gave me a box of pictures. She gave her grandchildren each a box of pictures. The pictures that some of you are looking at came from those boxes. So we have the pictures of our life that we can look through and tell the stories. And your grandchildren want to hear about how their parents got into trouble desperately.
Are you in this picture?
I am not in that picture. I was taking the picture.
She's not in love.
Yeah, right. The little, here, you will love this one, Wendy. Because I'm adorable in that one.
You're adorable.
Aww. You have an absolutely unlimited supply of stories. Other people call them events. This is the advantage that you have being a speaker. You are in the middle of something that is desperately awful, and where everybody else is beside themselves with what's happening, there's a voice in the back of your head which says, this is going to be a really good story. And you get to use it that way. So there are events that can turn into stories. And then there are stories that when you work on them become good stories. A good story is an event that turned into a story that's been crafted so it makes a point. And if you are really, really lucky, you can turn that good story into a great story. And a great story is one that by shading it slightly this way, it makes that point, and by shading it a little bit this way, it makes that point. Our job as speakers is to pay attention to the events and do the work to turn them into, ultimately, a great story. The process is one of time. An event happens. You're in the car going to a speech, and you're kind of running the video in your mind of what your speech is going to be, and you're going to think to yourself, oh, that would be great. I could open with what just happened to me at the gas station. It'll be perfect. Isn't it wonderful that the universe provides us with this material? What is the problem with that thought process? Yes?
It hasn't been crafted yet.
Right. All you have is an event. And some events are much better when they're happening than they are when somebody tells them for the first time. So that event is just an occurrence. It is not even a story yet. Now, if you are lucky enough and there's a long cocktail hour before you speak, well, no, that would be unlucky if there's a long cocktail hour before you speak. But let's say you get there in the morning and you can talk to people during the day. You could tell that event a couple times, and as you tell it, what will you get? Feedback. And what kind of feedback would you want to get? Laughter? Yeah, okay. Yeah, that was supposed to be funny, and they're laughing at the right place. This is good. What other kind of feedback could you get as you tell the story?
What they got out of it.
What they got out of it? You could specifically ask, so what does that mean to you? And see what they come up with. What other kind of feedback could you get as you tell this event?
Facial expressions?
Facial expressions, like rolling of the eyes, that usually tells you you're going on a little too long.
When they might ask you questions, and that might help you develop it.
Right, they might ask you some questions. You realize that you need to have announced the fact that the guy you were talking to was 6 feet tall, that's pertinent to the story. So you need time at the beginning to turn the event into a story that has a beginning and a middle and an end. And as you do that, you get that feedback and you realize that maybe this is worth telling. There is a thing called pride of ownership. or pride of authorship. Do you know what the downside of pride of authorship is? Any of you who have worked with an editor would have had this discussion.
Sometimes you think your own stories are greater than other people's.
Exactly. It happened to you and you really liked it. And so it's hard to get that feedback that's like, no, this really isn't working. So that first time block in between the event and having a story is about, is this worth pursuing? Now, you think you've got something that works pretty well. You've told it casually a number of times. You're starting to see where the point might be, and the next block of time is solidifying it. Will it make the point without having to say, and the point of that story is? If you ever find yourself saying, the point of the story is, and the reason I've told you this, stop telling that story, because it isn't crafted right, or it's the wrong story. It has not gotten to being a good story. A good story should stand on its own without a whole lot of explanation. By the way, a funny story should stand without having to say, this is really funny, you're really going to like this one. If you find yourself saying that, bad choice. And those people in our group like Roger Stoddard, who are wonderful professionals when it comes to humor, will tell you, if you have to tell somebody it's funny, it's not all that funny. Okay, so now we've gotten something that we can use in one place, and it works really well. And when you've got that, you've got a good story. Woohoo! Don't limit yourself. It is really interesting to say with an audience, especially if you're working with a smaller group, where you can say, you know what, I've been telling that story for about the last couple of years, and I really like it a lot, and to me, it fits perfectly at this point because it reinforces the message we've been talking about. I'm just curious, does it make a different point for any of you? Did any of you sort of go in a different direction with this story? And every once in a while you get somebody who says, you know, that actually made me think not so much about how leaders have to be visible, but how team members have to be open to each other. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, never thought about that. And if it's a story that has enough flesh behind it, enough event behind it, you could say, how could I recraft this so that sometimes, if I'm really talking about teamwork, I could use it in this story. Great, and now you're getting the beginnings of a great story. Great stories don't get memorized, they get told over and over again. I have a story that I tell about my son, that if you woke me up in the middle of the night from a dead sleep and gave me a line, I would give you the next line, because I've told it for 20 years. It is a great story. In fact, I have actually done it as a thing in a chapter where I said, you give me a point and I will tell the story to that point. Because sometimes you have a story that has a point that's so loud it screams at you and you know where it belongs in your material. Sometimes you have a story that you think, I know there's a point in there somewhere, I just don't know where it is. So you got the story, but you're searching for the point. Others, you've got a wealth of points that you could use. All of it is about quest, all of it is about time, all of it is about interacting with an audience. I got to tell you, my dear friends, I cannot think of a way that you can make a story work except to tell it to somebody. Whether that somebody is the cab driver or the person who's checking you in at the hotel, or whether it's sandwiched in between two really solid stories in an audience to see how the audience is going to work. But I only know that stories work in interaction with people. So my grandson Quinn is playing soccer, and he's on the sidelines because he's not very good, so he spent more time on the sidelines than he did actually playing soccer. And he's at the age where he doesn't understand that when you're not on the field, you're supposed to be watching what's going on. So he's sort of doing the space cadet thing. And I said to him, Quinn, I said, people participate in sports for different reasons. I said, most commonly, they do it because it's fun, or they do it because it gives them the chance to learn new things, or because they're winning. I said, how about for you? Which is most important for you? And he said, it's most important to have fun. And I said, your mom says that, because I heard my daughter-in-law's voice. She would say things, you know, when this stops being fun, we're not doing it anymore. And Quinn said, yeah, she does. I think it's important that it's fun. I said, some people like to win. He said, yeah, it's good to win, but it's not the most important. And he walks away because his coach is telling him it's time to go on the field. And he gets about 3 steps away and he stops and he looks at me. He said, you think it's important to learn new things? I said, yep. He said, that's because you do those speeches. Create for yourself a storytelling environment and the world will give you all the material you need. You have to bring the time to figure out where's the right place and in the right setting to use any particular story. I love telling stories. My family made me do it. I'm sorry, it's just the way I am. Oh my